Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Quorum Club. And whenever I speak with Seema, it's become a running theme now. We always say it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with her.
Pun intended.
In all ways possible. And this evening, we'll be speaking about her spectacularly informative, helpful book, Speak Easy. And over the last few years, I have seen Seema go through this book because writing a book is a lot and it takes out everything from you, each piece of your energy. But she has put her heart, soul, mind, everything into this, and we'll be deciphering the various connotations, ideas, themes, and the myriad ideas that Seema talks about in the book. But before we go there, we're going to go a little back to just mapping out this world that you began navigating years ago. For many of us, the TED talk that Seema gave on the arts of seduction was an entry point to learning about seduction and how it is an art. That was how I discovered her. And then finding her Instagram page, and well, the rest is pretty much history. So we'll go from there, Seema. Tell us about the arts of seduction process when you began writing that, and then over the years as you worked and you became a digital presence, you started getting all of these questions, and how that finally culminated in Speak Easy.
Okay, so some of you may have heard me say this, but the arts of seduction happened because I discovered the bit about the jewelry for lovemaking. So I'm a storyteller. I like telling stories. The idea of sitting down and writing is awful. It's like giving birth. It's horrible. And I did not want to do this. And then you all know about the jewelry for lovemaking, right? Okay, I discovered at one point that in ancient times, women were actually taught how to make love by how different pieces of jewelry moved on their body. Today, we have something called biofeedback, which is like a gadget that you put on your muscle to make sure that that particular muscle is working properly. In ancient times, your jewelry was your biofeedback, because even if your body wasn't moving right, the jewelry had a certain type of movement that it was supposed to do. And I just loved the idea that there was a time when it was like, no, you don't just jump on each other and have sex. It was supposed to be a choreographed dance. It was supposed to be perfect movement. And you had to get your body into a certain space to be able to feel the pleasure you're supposed to feel. And so the first time I discovered this was, and it's all written in metaphors, so it took me years to decipher this. But basically, if you are on top during lovemaking as a woman, and when we watch porn, which is where we learn most of our positions and everything from, you see the woman will jump. Okay? Now, that is probably the worst thing you can do for yourself, because you miss every single pleasure point when you do that. But in ancient times, they said that you would wear a jingling girdle with lots of ghungroos around your lower waist. Jingling girdle with lots of ghungroos. And then the idea was that you did not let the ghungroos make a sound. Okay? Now, you don't have to worry what you're doing. You just have to focus on those ghungroos. You don't have to think, okay, am I doing this right? Am I moving in the right way? So basically, you have to lean forward. How far forward do you lean? You would wear long earrings with it. So if you were on top, you had long earrings, and then you leaned forward till the earring fell across the cheek like this. And then as you moved, when you got that very sort of smooth swinging motion, you had the pace, you had the angle, and you had the movement. And every position had its own piece of jewelry. And I was just thinking, we come from a culture which thought of intimacy. It's such beauty. I mean, look at the vocabulary. It kind of excites the mind immediately, right? This is what I wanted to finally bring back. I wanted to bring that vocabulary back. So that's where Arts of Seduction started. Like you said, that was a long time ago. What I discovered was that the moment you start talking about the subject, in a place, in a space where nobody else is talking about it, you become like a safe space people come to you with all sorts of questions because they think, okay, maybe she can answer this for us. And so the questions started to come in. Yeah. And initially the questions were mostly from men, and they were mostly about how do I last longer and how do I get a better erection. And then gradually they started to come in from women, and gradually even the men who started to write in, they became so nuanced. I mean, the detail in the questions became so interesting. And we finally decided, okay, you cannot now answer them in a 90-second reel. Like, it isn't enough. It has to be written down. And that is just the easy part of it. That till then it was fine. It was like, yeah, this is great. You must do a book on this. Yes, perfect. Then the trauma started. You want to know about the trauma?
We'll get into the trauma.
Yeah, you'll get into the trauma.
We'll get into the trauma. You know, the thing about The Arts of Seduction was that it really took you into the details of the 64 arts that the Kama Sutra talks about and that you must master. And you know, if you have been following Seema's work for a while, I'm sure all of you are familiar with her work. That has been the crux, to go back in a time so far back and say, you know, this already existed. Before we go into the trauma, and because this book is based on questions, the first questions you're talking about, you know, these men asking you about what they quite literally think about all of the time, what their insecurities are when it comes to sex, and it's sometimes just limited to that. But then you talk about nuances. But one thing I'm particularly interested in, and all of us are, that we go from an age of the arts of seduction to an age of misinformation. All of these ideas around sex and pleasure and intimacy that quite literally exist, but they do not have a foundation. They are based on myths, on superstitions, on just thinking like the world will collapse if you have sex before marriage.
Or if you have pleasure.
Or if you have pleasure.
I mean, if you have pleasurable sex, the world will collapse.
Yes, exactly. So in confronting this misinformation, how has your trauma been before the trauma of the people that we discuss?
Okay, so, you know, it's really funny because I get told by people, gosh, you're really brave when you write this. I didn't think I was being brave. You know, it's just you start working on something, and you must also excuse me because I have kind of got used to talking about the subject. I sometimes forget that not everybody's used to talking about the subject. And so I just kind of talk about it in the most, like, yeah, theek hai, ye to hai. So yeah, if you gasp really loudly, if you think I've said something a little too risque, and then I'll just stop and edit it a little bit. But basically, yeah, I just think that I started to get more and more worked up because I was studying the Kama Sutra at the same time. And then I was listening to the stuff that was being said to us today. And the combination, it was so dystopian, you know, it was just so bizarre to sort of think that 2,000 years ago, they knew what they were talking about. They talked about, like for instance, okay, they talk about oral sex at great length. They talk about, I have to tell you one of my favorite stories, just to give you an idea of what I mean. This is one of my favorite stories. The Kama Sutra doesn't have stories. The Kama Sutra is more like an accountancy ledger. It just lists things out. So there is a woman, she's a courtesan, and one day this man comes to visit her. And he's a regular customer of hers. So he comes to visit her, and when he comes, she smells the perfume of another woman on him. Now, according to the Kama Sutra, you're supposed to perfume each part of your body with a different fragrance. So now imagine that if every part of your body has a different fragrance, what perfume have you left on your partner and on what part of him? So she starts to, when she smells the perfume of this other woman, she starts to get fascinated by this other woman. And so she starts to leave messages on this woman's body, on the man's body, for the other woman, with love bites and love scratches. Because again, the Kama Sutra talks about love bites and love scratches as its own vocabulary. So each one has its own shape, its season, its message, and so on. So she starts to leave messages on his body for her. And eventually the other woman picks it up and she starts to respond. And they have the most intense affair. They never meet. but they explore each other's bodies through his body. I think it's the sexiest story in Kingdom Come. I mean, he's probably really badly scratched up by now. But also probably really happy.
Very happy.
Thinking that, there are these two passionate women with him. But, I mean, it's a win-win. But basically, there was a time when pleasure was seen, and particularly the pleasure of woman was seen with absolutely no awe or no nothing. It was just there. It was meant to be. That changed. Not sure when it changed or how it changed, but it changed over the time. And if you think about it, the Kama Sutra with its metaphors actually inspired 2,000 years of our literature. Everything from Kalidas to Bhanudatta, even to the Urdu poetry of the Mughals, the Persian poetry of the Mughals. This is all based on the metaphors from the Kama Sutra. But yes, then we did finally get to a point where we lost all of it. Having said that, we always blame the British for this. They are also the ones who found the original copy and translated it, so we have to say thank you to them for that as well. The thing is that nobody else is researching the Kama Sutra from the Sringhara metaphors, and that's why it takes me so long, because sometimes it can take like 3 years to understand one particular thing that they put down.
It makes you really wonder how you go from two women scratching a man out of his body to being lathi charged on Valentine's Day, which has become like the norm of the times. It's a riddling thing. And the other riddling thing at heritage parks, where they say the biggest problem here is lovers coming inside. So,
no, how dare they?
Yeah, how dare people make love, because we love to hate love. But you talk about how the Kama Sutra is a text that quite literally inspires a generation of writers and readers and poets and translators and thinkers, because pleasure is then seen as more than just sex. It's not restricted to the bed. It deals with various aspects. And one thing that I really admire about Seema's book is that it quite literally opens up the door to understand that sex is just not physical pleasure, or intimacy and pleasure is not restricted to the bed. It is psychological, it is mental, it is all the thoughts that you have. So before we go into some of the questions in this book, which I find very fascinating, I want to understand the structure when you were bringing this down. Given the range of questions that you had, how did you end up making this book into the parts that you finally did? What was the thinking process behind that?
It was almost like, it was trauma. It was really torture. So the lovely people, the team from Bloomsbury sitting over here, our publishers. But basically, what I thought was, I'll pick the questions that come in the most. Because if somebody's asking about threesomes, it's not just one person. It's like so many people have the same question. If somebody's talking about pain during sex, so many people. I think the one I started with was about cuckolding, about a woman saying that my husband wants to watch me having sex with somebody else. And the thing is that there's no information around this. There's a lot of people asking for this. There's a lot of people saying that this is what turns them on, this is their kink, this is their fantasy, this is what they want for their pleasure, but there is no information around it. And when I say information, I mean there's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of things to consider. So it started with that, and I was taking all the questions that I thought were the ones that were coming in the most. And then we kind of had a moment of epiphany, because I did a podcast. I went and interviewed 2 young queer male sex workers. And I discovered from them that 75% of their clients are straight married men. It's actually guys in very, very senior positions at work who are going to them for relief and pleasure, because they cannot go to their wives for that kind of stress-free pleasure. And I realized that, of course, there were then a lot of questions that came in around that, which we put in a couple of them. But every time I thought, okay, I've got my list of questions. I think we made a list of about 158 questions. every time I thought I'd got my list of questions, there were more that cropped up, and I was like, ye wala to karna hai. This is really important. Oh my God, we can't have the book without this. So it did get quite difficult to pick and choose. But eventually, what did happen was that we ran out of word count, and we ran out of the time that I had to write it, and that's where the book stopped. Otherwise, I'd still be over there trying to...
Writing, yeah.
I'd still be arguing with it.
So I want to go back to the story because I think it sort of links with a very important aspect of intimacy, relationships, love and pleasure, which is communication. Now, I know that those two women were communicating in a very unique way, and not everybody has those devices to, have a lover and keep biting him and sending him to some other place. But...
Good try.
We could, if we were not being lathi charged, we could. So
it's something worth considering. I just want to put it out there to say that we should start an app.
We should, actually, yeah.
Get men to volunteer.
Yeah, that's the important part, start from there. But I want to talk about this because there is no all-defining one-word, one-sentence definition of desire. And where it becomes important for partners is communication. Is that one of the major problems that you see occurring? Because everybody, men, women, queer men, straight women, cishet, the range of sexualities, the range of desires, the range of ideas, it's all going to be different for all of us. So there's not ever one way to define it for either you or I. So is it communication? And it is that kind of trust building that leads to more pleasurable, desirous lives.
Yeah, I think the word communication is such a big word. And we use it so casually. We don't really realize how big a word it actually is. I think that most of us have got caught up in this thing of, this is the rule. I've got to tick the box. I have to be good at sex. I have to pass. It's like an exam. Yeah. We forget that sex or intimacy is about pleasure. And pleasure is about exploring, because every day your mood is different. You want to be pleasured differently. It's not the same every day, right? The tiniest little... I was doing a podcast for somebody the other day, and he had some of his students there, and this guy came to me and he said, if I have sex with my wife on a hard mattress, or if it is a soft mattress, it makes a huge difference to how we actually do even that same position. And I thought, you're absolutely right. The Kama Sutra starts off with 18 positions. By the time it's rewritten thousands and thousands of times, and we get to the Anangaranga, which is like the medieval, 16th century, we've got like 108 positions. And it's only because the furniture changed. So they've got variations of the position. Each time the furniture changed, they kind of said, acha, isko thoda sa tweak kar do, is position ko tweak kar do. But yeah, so I think everything impacts us. I think if the weather is like this, it's going to impact how you want your pleasure. If, you know what I mean? Like, everything changes how you feel. So I personally think that it is so important to be able to talk to each other. I also know it's not the easiest thing in the world. I also know that a lot of people will write and say that the partner gets very offended if you say, aise nahi aise. It is very difficult. I mean, on a personal level, it took me years to tell my husband that I didn't like being kissed in the ear. I mean, I absolutely hate it. He thought he was really doing, this was his idea of being totally romantic. And I literally had to sort of physically force him down and say, no, don't go towards the ear, I don't like it. But it's not always easy. Yeah. So I just think that we need to start accepting that we are worthy of the pleasure. So many women will actually say to me, I don't like the way he does it, but I don't want to upset him. So you just look at your priority. You're ready to do away with your own pleasure rather than telling him that I don't like it. Yeah. And yes, there are a lot of people who get offended. So somebody recently wrote and said that they couldn't manage penetration at all. So she went to see the doctor. The gynae said, no, you're doing it wrong. And then she said, bring your husband in and I'll teach him. So the husband was brought in. Gynae taught him. And he was so offended that he's not touched her ever since. He was like, how dare you go and tell somebody कि मैं नहीं कर सकता. So I think that communication is a two-way street. It's about talking and listening, or being open to talk, or being open to listen.
You know, Seema, when you were starting on this, you said that one of the things that people are most concerned about when it comes to this is just this question to the self, am I good at sex? And that is a question that's in the book. That's a question that you're frequently asked by people. But what the hell is being good at sex? Because if this definition comes into play of communication, of defining your desires, what is being good at it? And if you had to actually tell somebody who is coming with you with this insecurity, what do you say to them?
Okay, so we keep trying to say to people, there are no equations, there's no formula. If I have to bring it down to one thing, just one thing, I think what I would say is that, and I'm generalizing, so take this as a general statement because everybody is different. So if I have to give one bit of advice, I think for most guys, it is the fact that your partner is really engaged, okay? They're really into you. So when you're together, if he thinks that my partner is so into me, they're so excited, they're so turned on by me, that I am blowing their mind, that blows his mind. Yeah. And I think for women, weirdly, you have to go totally selfish. You have to forget the cares of the world. You have to forget whatever is happening out there and just literally focus on your pleasure. To be able to understand how to get to that point. And I think for that, the best thing is exploration. Like literally explore. There's a very famous sexologist who lived in the late 1800s, Havelock Ellis. He thought he was impotent. Till in his 60s, he saw a woman urinating, and that triggered the biggest erection. And after that, he realized that he was not impotent, that he had the capacity for pleasure. Pleasure is it can be so specific. Arousal can be so specific. And you'll never find out till you explore. So that's the one thing I'm going to say to you. Please explore. Do not think of this as a bad thing. Please understand that they actually believed that a woman's pleasure was what brought about the balance of the universe. So ladies, it's on you. Like, look at the climate change problem. You need to do this. So I just think that we don't, the Kama Sutra lists about 24 love festivals. They don't mention what they're for, they just list the love festivals. And it's taken me years to discover what they're about. So unlike Valentine's Day, these love festivals are not for couples. They were actually to bring the earth to her pleasure. So women would get together and they would go through different rituals to transfer their erotic vocabulary to the earth, because they believed in ancient India that when you have earthquakes and famine and floods and so on, it's not because the gods are angry with you. It's because the earth has forgotten her pleasure. She's become niras. She's forgotten what it feels like to have the sap run through her veins, to have the blossoms sprout from her branches. And it's about bringing the earth back to her pleasure. And only the women could actually do that, because the women would then transfer their desire, sort of the microcosm, the macrocosm. And I think it's amazing, but of course these were lost because there were no pundits being hired and being paid huge sums of money to do these traditions. So those books never got translated. So I'm now trying to find all of this work by going into all the 7th, 8th, 6th century Sanskrit plays, the Kalidasas and so on. So yeah, I do think that we believed in ancient India that pleasure was what actually did it for you. It's what did it for the world. It's what made the world okay. And I just want to say that at this point, so in one of the introductions of the Kama Sutra, Vatsyayan actually says, but pleasure of a woman takes a long time. It takes her a long time to get to that point. Now, men have got used to, for thousands of years, being able to come to their own pleasure as quickly as possible. Why should they spend so much time bringing the woman to her pleasure? And he says, you can't just tell people to do it, you have to make it aspirational. And so he says to the men, he says, guess what? You can bring your partner fully to pleasure, your business will do better.
It's for national security.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, ladies, gentlemen, get your profit statements out. Compare them in 6 months.
Last time Seema said that if you're having good sex, it's for national security.
Yes.
And essentially you are saying that if Delhi NCR does good pleasure and good sex, our AQI would get better. And we'd be able to smell. Okay, great. Noted.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and what Eric said, I totally believe that it is good for national security. See, they rewrote the Kama Sutra many, many thousands of times. Every king who ever came to the throne of his little kingdom had it recommissioned because they believed that if two people share truly mutually pleasurable intimacy, that relationship will become stable. And when all the relationships start to become stable, society becomes stable. And when society becomes stable, the kingdom becomes stable. Ergo,
And then
we're
the
doing this
world
for
just-
national
yeah,
security.
We're doing this for national security. Seema, you talked about how the essential aspect of knowing what's good is it begins with knowing your arousal and then goes ahead to figuring out your partner's arousal. But it sometimes happens, and you've seen this a lot of times, it could be during the middle of a relationship, it could be very early on, it could be partners who perhaps did not have sex before they decided to get into a relationship or they decided to marry. And once they understand each other, they have emotional intimacy, they have everything going on for them, but it's mismatched. It's not working out in the bed. And they think that because of that, the relationship may collapse or the person is not right for them. How do you deal with something like that?
So actually, there's a couple of chapters on that in the book. See, actually, the Kama Sutra was written on the idea of mismatch. So two things. It says that if you're going to have sex, it should be all about pleasure. If it's not pleasurable, please don't even bother. There was a gentleman I met recently, a Bengali gentleman who said, no, Seema, sex is like fish. Even when it's bad, it's good. It's like, bad fish, definitely, no. But anyway, so they say that one of the first prerequisites for good sex is that the sizes of the two people should vaguely at least coordinate with each other. Right. Because if there's a huge mismatch, it's not going to lead to pleasure. So that's what the positions were written for, to actually make the positions, make the sexual organs more compatible with each other. Because honestly, at no point did anybody ever send out a rishta saying, size bhej dijiye. So you can never tell, right, what sizes you're going to end up with. It's the same thing with libido. The book was actually based on the idea that we all have different humors. We all have different doshas, and we are different, essentially, in our libido. And so this, most people think of it as a failure. It's not a failure. It is the most natural thing in the world, that you have different libidos, and it's important to work at it. I just want to start by saying every relationship needs to be worked at. There are no automatics. Even if when you get married, there's the biggest amount of passion between you. You come together, whatever, not married necessarily, but you come together, there's the biggest amount of passion. At some point, that passion is going to settle into comfort. At some point, you are going to be different. I got married at 23. I am no longer the person I was at 23. My husband is no longer the person that he was at 34 when we got married. He is very different. Yeah, honestly, man, okay, I'm not going to go down there. He's half Punjabi, half Sindhi, and he's a 74-year-old man. Now, you think about it, what they're like at this stage. I always tell all the younger men, there's a lot of younger men, gentlemen, please look after yourselves, because it's very easy to fall into that trap. But yeah, I just think that we think that the moment the libido doesn't match, that there is a failure, and there isn't. I spent a long time on some of the chapters, and I think this was one of them. Just understanding that just like sex is not necessarily penetration, pleasure is not just about penetration. Libido can come from a million different things, but I will say the biggest killer for libido is stress and fatigue. It really is. Now, interestingly, I think I've mentioned this, that the Kama Sutra says that when you get together to actually be together for sex, even before you start the kissing, you start the foreplay, before that, where is your brain? Because let's face it, even if you say, okay, fine, we're going to do it tonight, you sit down, you start, your head is still on that email that you didn't send. It's on that contract you didn't sign. I used to say, I'd be like thinking about the train that was late because we could hear the train go by at night, Your head is in all sorts of places. So Kama Sutra says that you must always start with exchanging gossip. Gossip and cards. When you play tash, is the two things that make you forget the world. So basically, you gossip together, you laugh together. You do something, you tell each other weird stories which kind of make the other person go, no, that kind of thing. And the next thing you know is you're present with each other. We don't even start from there. We go straight into saying, libido theek nahi hai. Oh, ye nahi karna. We haven't taught one half of the population how to explore their body or what they might find pleasure in. We've told women, breasts are an erogenous zone, nipples are very sensitive. Not everybody is. Yeah. And so you already don't know what you're doing, even if your partner is encouraging you, and your brain is elsewhere. So stress and fatigue, biggest libido killers.
Right. But Seema, you said that, and it's true, when you got married at 23, it's very different from how you are now. And sometimes you may have had generally a very fruitful life with pleasure and intimacy and sex. And there comes a point when biology interferes. Age comes into the picture. There is menopause. There is, of course, problems with erection. There is all of that for a couple that has quite literally lived a very fruitful life. And I know for a fact that you get different types of questions from different types of age groups. And the latter one is particularly heartbreaking because they think that it's over for them, that there can't be any pleasure or intimacy after 50. But what do we have to say for that?
Okay, so I think the one thing I'd like to say, and this is for men and women both, yes, there comes a point in your life, particularly when it comes to menopause, you will go off it for a while, okay? You get hormonal dryness, you get brain fog, you get pain in different places, your estrogen drops, your testosterone drops, everything goes wrong with your body. It does get better. For guys, as they get older, a lot of them also go through a lot of changes. The thing is, the first thing I want everybody to know is, people feel, when can I go back to being like I was? You don't go back to being like you were. You have to move forward. It's going to be different. It's different. It's normal to be different. As you get older, even, in the chapter on how to reconnect with the body after trauma, it's the same thing. There's a lot of people who want to know, I was sexually assaulted, I had this problem. Can I go back to being as I was? You can reconnect with the body. It's not easy, but it can be done. But you don't go back to how it was before. It changes. Yeah. Now, for guys, I want to say that there's this belief that by the time you get to 50% of men have got erectile dysfunction. At 60% of men, 70% of men. So one of the chapters, which is on erectile dysfunction by Dr. Malik, who is a urologist, she said that you have to be really careful when you start to get ED, when you start to get erectile dysfunction, because more than likely, it is the first sign of a heart problem. Within 7 years, you will have a heart problem. She's that specific. And she said that it's, the fact that you've had a bad diet, you haven't exercised properly, etc., etc. And she says that if every 1 hour you can do 10 sit-ups, it will hugely improve your sex life. It's not that difficult. Every 1 hour, 10 sit-ups. Not a bad thing, right? Yeah. Now, similarly for women, the one thing that I was never given in the UK, I live in the UK, we are not, they're not very good with HRT. They're not very HRT friendly. They didn't teach me about HRT. Like, I had no information, and in those days we didn't have the internet either. So I started on one, it made my periods come back. I started on another one, it did something else to me. Finally, I gave up. It was only recently I discovered that my endometrial lining had become thicker, and the gynecologist said to me, sorry, my throat is going funny. Gyne said to me, you need vaginal estrogen. I'd never heard of vaginal estrogen. And she said, this is not like regular HRT. It's not going to make any difference to your body. It's localized just for the vagina. Please get it, because this is also going to prevent recurring UTIs. It's that important for women. I went to my GP and I said, I want vaginal estrogen. They were like, nahi de sakte, because you are this age and this is HRT and this might lead to cancer. And then I had to go back and forth from the sexual health consultant to my gynecologist to my GP before they finally agreed to give it to me. And you know what? It has made the world of difference. It brings back your desire for intimacy. It makes things less painful. It helps you to stay clear of UTIs. I mean, every woman should be getting this. So, yes, there are plenty of possibilities as you get older. There is no end. I mean, there's no this thing of, oh, now this is finished. And I want to tell you that a lot of older people that I know actually enjoy very fulfilling sex lives, and it's great for you. One is it keeps the bond alive between the two of you. It also keeps you mentally stable and healthy, because one of the studies shows that people having more sex are better at maths.
Right. Oh. I'm not that good at maths, so I don't know what that says about me.
But we know what that says about you.
But you know, this is so interesting what she's saying, because we do not realize, I mean, what she's just spoken about healthcare, I do not think this is common knowledge. These are not things that you would ever talked about. Even when you speak about sex education in school, for us in India, if you remember, there used to be that one chapter in biology that everyone used to say, chapter 9 aane wala, as if, you know, it was going to come and destroy you. And the teacher herself, himself, would not use words that are on your body. You know, they would find a way to say the male part or the female part and just hush you through it. But you don't realize, if this is something that you have to live with every single day of your life, you need to quite literally know everything about it, and healthcare and knowledge and everything that Seema does. Before I go to the next question, can we please just give a huge round of applause, because this is the kind of conversation that we really need. Now, Seema, we've been talking about mismatches, and sometimes mismatches are very natural, but there are matches that are superimposed on you when you're told that you're a mismatch and that it won't work for you. There's an entire section in Seema's book on navigating queerness, and I think for queer folks, for anybody who has felt their desires located in a grammar that does not exist for us to explore in heteronormative lives, you do not even know where to begin. And most of the times, the kind of questions I know that you get from a lot of people are either those who think that they are straight, and they feel a sense of guilt and sin and just do not know what to do. There are from those who are married in heterosexual relationships, but still pursuing their true queer desires. They are from those who know for a fact that they are straight, but they will still go to sex workers who are queer to release their pleasure. And then there are questions from those who are so afraid of coming out to their families, of expressing themselves to their parents, to anybody, and in that process, they never end up finding love or pleasure. How was it for you navigating this? Because I know for a fact that when something like this, and I know how personally Seema feels about this, when you get these questions, how do you deal with that first? And second, then we'll go into some questions in the book.
Yeah, I got really traumatized, I have to say. I want to fix the world. Like, I literally want to take everybody on my godi and make everything okay. I get very, very personally involved. I get very distressed. And it did become a problem for me. So I had to take a break in the middle and sort of, just basically fix my brain a little bit. But I really wanted this to be a book where you can open up that page and say, okay, I've got my answers. So whether it was something that I've also personally gone through, somebody wrote and said that she's going through the good girl syndrome, that she feels so much guilt about having sex because we've been taught that, you shouldn't have. And she's like, I'm such a feminist. I applaud and, support other women, but I can't do it myself because I think my mother trusts me so much. How can I do this, right? So everything from there to somebody, and when you resonate with something, because my mom always had this thing about you can go out with whoever you want so long as I get to meet this guy before you go out with him. And so I didn't get asked out that much because a lot of the guys didn't want to come home and sit with my mother before taking me out. But there's a lot of guilt that we carry for all sorts of things. I think that, again, something I'd like to say, we are all on the spectrum when it comes to our sexuality. There is no such thing as the North Star. Like, there's no hard and fast sexuality. We all have a spectrum, and I want to also say that a lot of people think that when we talk about gay people, let's say queer people, that the only thing that makes them queer or gay is that they choose to have sex with an unusual partner. It's not just about sex. It's how you form your connections. It's how you form your bonds. It's how you form your relationships. All that comes into it. So, for instance, I went through a phase of thinking, do I prefer women? Experimented a little bit. Discovered that I make much closer emotional connections with women, but I prefer my physical connection with a man. So there are all sorts of things, and that can change depending on, I'm going to tell you something very, very private. So my very first experiment was when I was much younger. Maybe I was 11 years old, and this was a very good friend of mine, and it's still a memory I hold. It's, she and I would make out every now and then, and it is absolutely one of my best memories. I still use it for self-pleasure. When I was 16, I tried it again, and I decided, no, this is not for me. But I think it's because the experience wasn't so great. The lighting was horrible, the room was horrible, nothing was right about it. The thing I'm trying to say is that we give ourselves so much guilt. You think about something, every now and then you get carried away, you look at somebody, you fantasize about them, and then you kill yourself with guilt. It's okay. You are allowed to be attracted. You are allowed to fantasize. You're allowed to feel that excitement. It's in your head. You're not doing anything about it. It is absolutely normal. We are all on that spectrum. And you can be straight and still as a man, go to another man for pleasure. You can. And it doesn't make you queer. On the other hand, maybe you are queer. I mean, you don't have to put a label. That's all I'm trying to say. That's the worst thing that we've done to ourselves, I think.
Another thing that Seema deals with in the book is, apart from the fact that there are these very hard-hitting realities for certain sexualities and women, I mean, that's just a fact. If you're not a heterosexual male, I think we all have come to a point to accept it. Life is easier for you when it comes to certain things, especially when it comes to pleasure and talking about this. But there are instances where somebody is able to form an emotional bond. They have a lot of intimacy, but something like the Kundali comes in the picture. And so, well...
We actually had to deal with a question on that. This is very specific to India, that, there are any number... And initially, I was like, I have to deal with this really, really carefully. Subsequently, we got a bunch of other ones. So somebody said that they were getting on really well, everything was matching, and then apparently they went out for drinks, and she said, "Bhai, I don't believe in the Dahej." And the next day, they got a call saying, "Bhai, kundli nahi match kar rahi," you know. So there are also, but we did deal with something where this guy was like, we were going to get married, and suddenly her mother said, "Send your birth date." And now 10 pundits are saying, I'll cheat on her, I'm bad, I'm this and that. How can they say this about me? And why isn't she fighting for our relationship? Yeah. And I think we have to understand that this is a really difficult thing to fight for. Yeah. Because if even the tiniest thing goes wrong with your relationship, and every relationship is going to have something go wrong, it'll be like, Dekha, bola tha na. It's just really weird because there are some things that are very specific to India. Yeah. There's another one that came in, which I want to talk about, which is so this woman wrote saying that her husband cheated on her. And eventually, when she questioned him, he was sending nudes and so on. He said to her, okay, the thing is, you've become very spiritual. You're doing all these fasts and things. So I started to respect you, and I lost my attraction for you. And now I did this, and that's brought back my libido, so everything is okay. And she's almost dying, saying, did I make this happen? And did he fix it by cheating? Now, the thing is, yes, it was very easy for me to say, he's gaslighting you. Very easy. But it's also something that's a reality in our society. We say this. We say spirituality and sexuality cannot exist together. We say that all the time, right? And if I ever try and say anything else, I'm trolled for it. We say, we have guys saying all the time, no, she is girlfriend material, she is wife material. And then it's like, okay, I can be loyal to her and I can be erotic with her. There is this, and also I was just thinking, we don't teach people to communicate. When that libido goes, when that attraction goes, when that chemistry goes, we don't say, baat karo. We're like, nahi, ye to ho gaya, ab tum jaake cheat karo. It's like so. And I was also thinking, imagine if this guy had actually said it to her. Can you see the reaction? What do you mean? You're saying I am wrong for being religious. You're saying I am wrong for being spiritual. Can you not think of anything else? Can you see that conversation happening? We are so caught up in these weird ideas and verticals that we've made. We don't want to explore. We don't want to think about anything outside the box. And then we're like, relationship theek nahi ja rahi. Nobody teaches us how to have a relationship. But everybody's expected to have a relationship and make it work really well all your life. But like, no, we won't tell you what to do. Exactly. There are some fascinating questions in there. Sorry.
And what did the couple, the other people around you, they keep feeding you with all those things. Even if the couple is going fine, but then the people, if you're spiritual, and at the same time you are a social person and you like to party, you like to dance, you like to go around, but then the people start judging you that you are spiritual. How come you be, in this world like so materialistic? And then the other way, they will tell your husband then, your wife is so spiritual but she's drinking wine. My God, how is that possible? So this is such a, you just banged on the question and I really related to it.
Thank you. Eric went through the trauma of this question with me. It took me 4 weeks to write this one. I wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it because I was so frustrated. I was like, I know I want to talk about his gaslighting, but I still have to validate what he's going through as well because it's our reality. Another one which I thought was really very, very spot on. So this is this young guy who said that he's recently got married and he has a girlfriend, like a best friend who's a girl. Ties Rakhi on him, everything is wonderful. So one time he and his Rakhi sister and the fiancé, that time the fiancé, go to Goa for a holiday. And they're playing in the water and both the girls are teasing him. So they're pulling him down, they're pushing him under the water and he's kind of, the usual this thing, everything is fine. And he said that my Rakhi sister, who's quite busty, was knocking into my arm, and I ended up with an erection. And he said, it happened. I didn't think anything about it. It went, which is very, very natural. It's a touch. It can happen very naturally. Now, with this thing of saying, I have got married, I will start my marriage with no secrets between us, he tells his wife. The wife is now saying, कि मैं तो तुम्हें छोड़ के जा रही हूँ, because you like her, and she's got an insecurity because she's small-breasted. Yeah. And, again, this whole idea that, it's like if you bite into an apple. You bite into an apple, your mouth will water, even if there's a worm inside that apple, which you find later, your mouth will water. There's a certain kind of touch, your body will react to it. And that's what we don't teach anybody about their bodies. That these things happen. So I found that some of the questions that we worked with were just so fascinating, so relatable. And it bothered me that there's nobody that they can go to ask these questions.
We have last 5 minutes remaining, and then we'll open up to the audience for more questions from them. But I do want to, end this with the internalized psychological issues that some of them came up with, and they asked you. One of them being about bad dreams. That was something that I found very fascinating. That is something that you end with. Let's talk about that psychological burden about having bad dreams about sex.
So it's really interesting because somebody wrote to me saying, I get these terrible dreams about sex, like violent sex. And she said that they're so disturbing that I kind of wake up screaming. And I told my mother about it, and she said, nahi, puja karwani padegi. And this is another real issue. And initially I thought, should I actually deal with it or not? And then more started to come in, and this gentleman who was early 50s, late 40s, he wrote to me saying that during Navratri, they were keeping the fast, they were doing all the puja. His wife started getting really aggressive sexual dreams. And he was so disturbed. He was like, hum kuch galat kar rahe hain, hum aur puja kar rahe hain, nahi puja. And I really wanted to say that this is not about puja. This is not about sin. This is not about you being a bad person. It's just how the brain functions when it's at rest. And what I discovered was that when you when you're dealing with a biggish emotion, like something that's quite intense, the vocabulary of the brain, it translates it to sex, because sex is an intense experience. And so it's not about doing puja. I mean, I'm not saying puja is bad. Please do puja. But I'm just saying this is not about doing puja, because unfortunately then we change the whole thing completely and put more shame on the person. And these are the things that we have to get rid of. These are the myths that we have to get rid of.
Thank you, Seema. So, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody over here, that's Speakeasy, that's Seema. She's quite literally made it easier to speak about all of this. And this is not a self-help book. This is a book about the nuances and the niches of sexual life that contain within them the physical, the mental, the inward, the outward, and impact all of us. So thank you once again for being a wonderful audience. We will open up to the audience to take a few questions, and then Seema will sign her books. So if we have questions, please just raise your hand and we'll get a mic your way.
Thank you, Seema, for such a pleasurable...
Okay.
Thank you for such a pleasurable talk. I'm here.
Yeah, there.
On your left, hi. Well, talking about sexual arousal and how, unique it is to each person. Everybody kind of have different, things that, gives them pleasure or arousal. I have a very specific question, which I have been grappling with. Well, I know someone who perhaps gets aroused through exhibitionism. So, but then that man is married. So within the bounds of a relationship, how can that person pursue that desire within that relationship?
So do you mean exhibitionism or PDA? Like, are we talking about
exhibitionism?
Exhibitionism. So, okay, I find that every fetish and every fantasy, there is always a slightly, so there's a slightly domesticated way, let's put it that way, of dealing with that particular fantasy for the person. So if your partner is okay with it, and you and your partner role play this, and you have the exhibitionism, there's a certain level of exhibitionism that you can actually go out with as well. But for most of it, I would suggest that you role play it with your partner and just let it be a slightly consensual boundary that you work within. There are, I'm not sure about the clubs over here. I know that there are some kink clubs that could help you out with that.
They're a bit underground, though. We're still like just hiding.
So the kink clubs are
Kodam
underground.
Club
We're
is
not
not
going
one.
to worry
Shawnee
about
will
that.
make it clear.
Yeah.
Though it's very atmospheric and...
But the thing is, the thing with any kind of fantasy, any kind of fetish, any kind of arousal, the first thing is always that if you want your partner to be part of it, it's got to be fully consensual on both sides rather than coercive. And it's very easy to get coercive because I've met a lot of people who will say, "Ek bari kar lo, if you love me, kar lo, aisa kya hai, it'll help me." So it has to be fully consensual. You have to make sure that you are safe because especially when it comes to something like this, you can end up in a very unsafe space if you try and be a little bit more of an exhibitionist person in public. That can lead to certain problems. So I think the most important thing I can say is that sorry, my throat is really bad. You develop that as role play within the partnership. There is a chapter in the book on BDSM, which I worked with somebody who is based in Canada, and she actually uses BDSM for healing from trauma. So rather than the usual this thing of, okay, we're using BDSM to, do certain acts, they actually use it to understand how you would use this certain acts of BDSM to even get over things like sexual assault. So even the consensual non-consent done in particular ways so that you can actually heal from sexual assault. I think that particular chapter would be useful for you to read. Yeah.
Thank you. We had another question over here and then one more over there.
Hi, Seema, I'm Romy. The question which interested me was, you said stress and fatigue are the two major factors in taking the pleasure away in perimenopause and menopause. So in your view, which are the sure shot methods to get self-seduction?
Sorry, to get what?
Which would be a self-sure way to give yourself a self-seduction? Like, how do you self-seduce yourself to pleasure?
So if you're with a partner...
Or being yourself too.
Okay, so if you're with a partner, like I said, it's absolutely the most wonderful thing to just actually start with the whole gossip or watching something funny. If you're actually self-pleasuring, if this was just for you, I really suggest that you give yourself enough time. That's the most important thing. So when you put aside time for self-pleasure, it shouldn't be on a timer. It shouldn't be like, acha, aadha ghanta hai, 20 minute hai, isme jaldi se. You know what I mean? Like, because the idea here becomes that you have to change the narrative in your head. I don't know about you, but I find that there are times when I'm so worked up that even if I'm going into my self-pleasure routine, my story in my head is fighting with the stresses that I'm dealing with. And I have to focus really hard on bringing myself into the right space. And that doesn't happen if I go to the action. Like, okay, there is this particular act. When this happens, that gives me quick arousal. I know that I can sort of get to that point and start my masturbation journey.
I have to change it. So I actually change it to romance. Yeah, I'm walking down the road. You see somebody coming from the other side. You smile. Is there a little touch? Do you know what I mean? You're building it up. You're building it up to erotica, but you're building it up slowly. I think also reading erotica is a great way to... Reading erotica is a great way to actually get your mind in the right place. And there are some audio podcasts that are erotic podcasts, so as opposed to visual porn. The audio podcasts are a fantastic way of just getting yourself into that right space. Aside from that, I don't know about you, but there are certain things that do it for me. Like sometimes I just listen to old Hindi songs, and it just puts me in a really mellow mood, and then I'm like, open to the world of romance and joy. But you know what I mean, like the 60s songs. So it really depends. But I think the most important thing is to give yourself that space to be able to because you have to take your mind there first and then let the body follow.
Thank you. We have a question over there. And, and over here too. And I think this would be the last question. The conversation can continue over signing.
There's somebody here, there's somebody there. And I'll be really quick with my answer.
So when someone gets married, there's excitement in the marriage, but once you have kids, there's exhaustion and you lose that spirit. How to handle intimacy at that time?
You literally have to focus on doing it. So it's really weird because last week we were at a family wedding and all my kids were here. And my eldest one, who was married, his wife came to me and she said, everybody told me that after I have the baby, I'm going to be tired, this will happen, that will happen. Nobody said that the relationship is going to take a dip because we are not prioritizing ourselves anymore. Literally, you have to learn to book those dates with your partner like you book your child's vaccination. It's that important, is what I'm saying. You have to find the time. It can't be at all times because your body is tired, your mind is tired. You want to be holding the baby. There's a million things. This is the last thing on your mind. The only thing I want to say is once a week, once in 10 days, whenever you find that time to go on a date together, it shouldn't be a candlelight meal. Do something physical, do an activity where you're actually spending time with each other. Because if you go for a candlelight meal, you will end up talking about the baby. So you need to be at an activity, and you actually need to focus just to remind yourselves for a little while that you are partners and you still love each other. It's very difficult to prioritize each other at this point. But I just feel that if you don't do it, at some point, see, the further it dies down, the more difficult it is to bring it back up. So for the time being, schedule it. It's not unromantic to schedule it, but do it with real clarity that, okay, this is just about us as a couple.
Over there. Yes, go ahead. In the back, and then we'll take one question from you.
Yeah, all right, I'll stand up. Thanks for the amazing talk, Seema. I find it extremely informative. So, and I was taking copious notes. So you said...
Kushagra, could you put the mic closer?
Sure. Can everyone hear me now? Yeah, better? All right. So you said communication is such a big word and everyone wants to be pleasured differently. But I feel like in our society and the culture that we come from, a lot of communication is explicit, but even more amount is implicit. It's non-verbal. It's unsaid. And we communicate implicitly, especially in our context. So what are some of the practical ways in which couples can, talk about their sexual needs without turning it into like any sort of criticism or defensiveness? Like, how do you then communicate?
I generally think that a ritual is a really good idea. So you build in rituals into where you actually have certain talking rituals, where you say, okay, this is, let's say once a week we do, I don't know, a shower together or something. I don't know, but just basically, you have a time which is set aside for talking, but I will tell you what I personally did, because I've been married 40 years, and we did get to a point where the sex side of it had become completely dead, and is like, yeah, I'm so comfortable. I just want to read a book. I don't want to do this. And then you realize you have to come back to it, but you don't really want to. What we started to do was we set a timer for ourselves every day for 15 minutes, where we lie down skin to skin. Literally, you lie down naked for 15 minutes, and this is not sexy time. This is actually talking about your day. So what you did at work, whatever happened, etc. Because I discovered that the one thing I had really forgotten was how it felt to just touch my husband's skin. Like, just the feel of each other's skin on your hands. That's what you forget. You forget what it feels like to just be held and be intimate and be close. So the idea was to actually bring back that closeness, the desire to be close. Initially, I would set a timer because I'd be like, I have other things to do. I can't spend all my time just lying over here with you. And I would always make sure that I did it after it became dark outside. I don't know why. But I found gradually that it became such a wonderful way of talking, where there was no, because we were so close, because you're actually holding each other so closely, there is less chance of the other person taking offense. And so that touching, that feeling, became the basis, the foundation for the conversation. And that was just really useful for me.
Thank you. We have one final question from her, and then the conversation can, I think, continue over the signing.
Thank you, Eric. Loved your questions, by the way, and love what you're wearing. And Seema, I've been following you for a while. I have a question which is personal to you, and which is that how lonely was the journey, considering being a woman in India? If you speak about things like this, we are eons away from even talking the way that you have. I'm glad you are talking like this. What I need to know is, being from the UK, did you feel that you had a bit of an advantage? Because in India and the current scenario that we are in, it's crazy. So were there moments of loneliness ever that, okay, I'm on the journey that I've embarked upon? It is like that. Although it's the most natural thing in the world, yet, did you have that?
I did. I have talked about this before. I lost some friends. I lost some very good friends, best friends. I had people who said, can't hang out with you anymore, can't talk about this. I had friends where one of them was like a surrogate mother to my daughter. She and somebody else got together and put out the word that I was a corporate call girl. I was in my 50s. The corporates were doing badly. They needed a 50-year-old. Anyway, so I had a lot of that shit to deal with. I think the only thing that I really got lucky with is my children. They have supported me. They've literally stood by me through thick and thin. Because I also, my half Sindhi, half Punjabi husband also went through his phase of what the hell do you think you're doing? And the thing is, I'd kind of decided that this was my work, this was my journey, and I wasn't going to give it up. So it would have been like deciding whether our relationship continued or not. So I'm glad that it did continue. But I think that I can say for sure that if my kids, particularly my daughter, had not stood by me and made sure that even when I first started on social media, which was in 2020, during COVID, because before that I told my daughter, I think I should join Instagram. And she was like, don't be silly, people of your age don't go on Instagram. And so in 2020, when we were all locked in and she had just finished her third year, couldn't go to any parties, she started it for me at that point. And I think that even at that point, when the trolling first began, and it was quite vicious, I didn't know how to deal with it. I had no idea, and I would be in floods of tears.
with the threats and, the death threats. It was horrible. And so she literally, I would wake her up in the middle of the night and she would sort of just hold me and then deal with those. And my sons would then sit around me and say, do you want me to go and beat him up? You know, that whole this. But yeah, they were literally the ones who walked me through this.
And we're so glad that you're still here doing this because of you. We're able to have these conversations. We actually, can we take one more?
I just want to
Okay, but
say
I just,
something.
before Shravani asks her question, apart from one man, we have had no other men in this room. Oh, then so we're going to have you also ask after Shravani. You have to ask. Now you have to ask.
Okay, I just have one thing to say. That is, there are a couple of really young women in this room at the moment who are not in their 30s, who are primarily just above their teens. A couple of them. I just want a message from you to them because this is their foundation years. This is where they start exploring. Like you said, you know, it is very important to explore. And these are the years that you actually start exploring. But most early 20s or even teenagers, I have a niece, so I know because she keeps talking about it. She's not okay with sex toys. She thinks it's a wrong thing to do. She thinks masturbation is not the right thing to do because it's the society. It's the society that we are growing in. Like where a Supreme Court judge actually says, how can you think of sex before marriage? Which is, wow. Okay, yes. So I just want you to give out a message to the young women who are all here, who would, I think that's going to be... I won't say inspiration, but at least give them a clarity of the mind when they are in the moment of a sexual intimacy.
Okay, so two things I'd like to say. One is that this whole idea when I started this work was that I wanted mums and daughters to actually start communicating about this because I think our daughters need us to stand by them, to give them the right information. So that was the whole idea. One of the things that somebody said to me, and this is another reason for this book, was that they said that they have two daughters who were 17 and 20 at that point. And they said, what we do is, it's very difficult to tell kids, acha aake baitho baat karte hain, because they never want to do that with you. I know that from my own children. If you don't tell them something, it's like, you never told me this. If I try to tell them, it's like, ew, don't talk to me about it. Yeah. So you can never win. But basically what they said was that whenever I do a relationship question on social media, they will take that question and they make it part of their dining table talk. So it's a relationship question. And they get to discuss it. It's safe. You get your kid's opinion on it. You get to put your own opinion into it as well. Because the thing is that what we have at the moment, like Eric said earlier, is misinformation. And it's the misinformation that is more dangerous than anything else. So you need the real information so that you can make well-informed choices. And that is what is so, so important. So I would suggest that porn is not the place to go for real answers, ever. Even though I did some work recently with a lady called Erica Lust. Erica Lust is one of the biggest makers of adult entertainment. She's based in Spain. I went to have a long chat with her. We talked over time. And her stuff is mostly behind a paid wall, so it's not free porn. But still, I would not say that porn is the right place to go to. But please have your conversations. Actually have conversations so you can hear what other people have to say. I had somebody saying, my husband says, कि इलायची खाने से contraception हो जाती है. She was pregnant within the first month. So the thing is, we need to actually get rid of the myths and the misinformation. We need to stop saying, oh, everything that we did in the past was scientific. You know, let's actually start to have conversations. So, yeah, the best thing I can suggest is, whether it's your mother, your aunt, your friends, actually sit down and talk, because the silence is what's killing us.
don't go to porn. There's an Instagram page I know of. It has about 1.5 million followers, I think, right now, and it's called Seema Anand Storytelling. So if you do want information and the right kind, please go there. A huge round of applause for Seema. A huge round of applause for being such a wonderful audience. I think we have learned 3 things this evening. The first thing...
And for Eric.
Thank you. That there is much more to pleasure and sex and intimacy than just what happens on the bed, and the grammar of desire is different for everybody. The second thing that we have learned, and Shawnee would attest, Quorum Club is not an underground club. And the third thing that we have really learned, that if tomorrow morning when I wake up and I check my AQI and it's less, it means that Gurgaon had a great night. So thank you for being here. Seema's books are right outside. Please get them signed, and have a lovely evening. Thank you.